Science Gym of Shiloh Kahal. So, with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in around 1947, 48, whatever that was, almost immediately, pretty quickly, theories and information started coming about, and being developed about what this was all about. Um, and by the time the 90s had come around, there tended to be a prevalent theme, a prevalent approach to who the community was and some of the identities. The folks in the Dead Sea Scrolls, a new translation, they like to call the original and most commonly prevalent theory the standard model. Okay. But here's the essence. If you read these books and their forwards and their introductions, you will see a commonality, and they all pretty much agree on these types of items. First of all, they suggest that the community came about in the mid second century BC. The second century would be 199 BC to 100 BC, and if you just just take the middle of it, that would be 166 BC to 134 BC. And it existed until it was destroyed by Rome, somewhere in that Rome-Jewish war, in the area of 68 to 70 AD, about the same time that Jerusalem was destroyed. And of the three prevalent groups of Judaism that folks identified, the Pharisees, Sadducees, and now the Essenes seem to be the only viable option. And admittedly, Essenes were fairly esoteric and unknown. Uh, what we did know came from historians Philo, Josephus, and Pliny, and seemed to reference a group of people that lived on the coast, on the western coast of the Dead Sea, and then actually throughout the lands of Israel. And there was some information that they offered, but not a lot, about the characteristics of this community. At least one of the authors will identify the community as resulting from a split within the larger community of Essenes. So this, the community at Bethabara, or the Khirbet Qumran, the ruins of modern day Qumran, it's a result of a minority split within the larger Essene community that then formed there on the northwest corner up around Bethabara. Now, all three of the authors of these compilations of, these translations and the compilations of scrolls, all of them identify the similarities between the characteristics of the community as identified through the scrolls themselves and some of the similarities provided through Philo, Josephus, and Pliny. But then they also acknowledge differences, knowing that it's not an exact fit. But I'm pretty confident Giza Vermes still thinks that the Essenes are the best explanation. I think Wise and Abegg Jr. and Cook all identify, maybe somebody else, although they're not sure. And I'm pretty confident that Florentino Garcia Martinez also, mostly without having a better alternative, still embraces the idea of the Essenes. And then we have within the scrolls a teacher of righteousness that is identified and referenced throughout the scrolls themselves. And all three of these authors, and really a prevailing understanding of who the teacher of righteousness would be, is this concept that the teacher of righteousness is the founder of the community. So he would have existed as a man, as a priest who founded this community somewhere in the mid second century BC. The scrolls also reference wicked priests who are also identified as sons of lies and a few other similar type things. Again, they're referenced in the scrolls themselves. And the wicked priest, singular or plural, if it's a singular priest, whether it's singular or plural, he or they are the antagonist in opposition to the teacher of righteousness, or antagonist and in opposition to this particular community. And lots of options are offered. People keep putting forth ideas. most suggest, and I think all of these authors would suggest, that the identity of the wicked priest is either a priest within the grouping of Hellenistic or Hasmonean priests, or both, or it's the sum of the Hellenistic priest or the Hasmonean priest. So if you've got 4 or 5 Hasmonean priests, they're all the wicked priest or priests. And then there's also a reference to the Kittim throughout the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we have reference to the Kittim in Daniel, and some reference to Kittim in the original scriptures. In Daniel, we know that the Kittim, we're pretty confident, I should say, that the Kittim, the ships of Kittim, basically point to Rome, and I would agree with that. I mean, that's and then all 3 of these, at least 2 of them, stated outright, but I think all 3 of them kind of embrace the idea that the Kittim is Rome. And then there's reference to sons of light and sons of darkness, which I won't develop here because I don't really think it's developed amongst these translations and the authors of these translations. But it is, hypotheses and ideas about who they are is offered elsewhere. And eventually, when I come back around and deal with these items individually, focus a little bit on the sons of darkness and the sons of light and who their identities are. Okay, but I'd like to offer some alternative solutions that you won't hear about in very many circles, and you won't read them in the books, in the introductions and the forewords of these books. But I think what I'm getting ready to share is founded by analysis of the information. So let me just offer some competing information here. First, I would agree that the formation of this community was in the mid-2nd century BC. I would say post 175 BC, which is when Onias III was deposed, and probably either at the time of the Hasmonean priesthood or before the Hasmonean priest, maybe during the time when all of the persecution was taking place and the rise of the Maccabees occurred, that this community formed. And let me say that I think that this community is not related to Essenes or any what has become known as Judaism, but it was rather Israel. And what, if you're reading the old writings, the old scriptures, what is consistently referred to as the faithful remnant. Always within the history of Israel, you had the larger society, the larger community going astray, but a small group, a remnant within the community of Israel that was always trying to stay faithful to Yahuwah and his ways, the Torah, etc. And that's what I believe this community is. It is a gathering of the faithful remnant who found themselves in a difficult place as a certain history grew all around them in the time of the Greek Empire, the Seleucid invasion, etc., or not invasion, but the Seleucid controls. So let me say that Onias III was the last Zadokite priest. He was deposed by Antiochus and then ultimately killed, but he was deposed by Antiochus in 175 BC, and was installed. And in his place, Jason, his brother, was installed, which was the first of 3 Hellenist priests that sat in the role of the high priesthood as inserted by the Greeks, Antiochus IV. And the Hellenist priests were installed in 175 BC and reigned at least until 160. When I get to my timeline, which I'll show you in a few moments, there's a gap between this and the time of Jonathan. So I'm not sure if we have wrong dates or if we just had a gap in the high priesthood. We just didn't have a high priest sitting for about 8 years. But the Hellenist priests were installed and definitely served at least 15 years to at least 160 BC. And it was during their time as high priest that Antiochus made I'll go into this in a moment. But this was the time of the Maccabean revolt. Jonathan was the first of the Maccabean Hasmonean priests appointed in 152 BC, following the Hellenistic non. Jonathan and the Maccabees were at least Levites, even though they weren't the Zadokite priests. They were at least Levites, but the Hellenist priests weren't even Levites, except for Jason for a couple years of it. Um, but Jonathan was appointed by the Seleucid ruler of the time in 152 BC, and then served for 8 or 9 years before his brother Simon. He was arrested and then ultimately killed, and then Simon, his brother, was appointed by a council of the Jews, which I will go into more in just a moment. So I would say that this group has nothing to do with the Essenes. If the Essenes really existed and had characteristics as outlined by Pliny and Josephus and um, the other historian, fine, they had characteristics, and I'm sure they did exist in the day, but it's not the essence of this community. This community would be the faithful remnant, where the Zadok priests who were deposed in 175, some of them went down to Egypt. The son of Onias went down into Egypt, where he formed a community that would be outside of Torah. But many of those who were of the family of the Zadoks, who could have become legitimate high priest and remained faithful, coalesced together and ultimately formed in a community over on the northwest corner known as Bethabara. Um, and so this formation of a community had nothing to do with the Essenes, and it was not a result of a split within the Essene community, but rather it was a split that resulted within Israel as the Zadokites are deposed and replaced by Hellenism. And most of Israel followed it. They just followed the Hellenistic priests and all of the Hellenization. I mean, they followed into the new calendar and other things. So they just followed it. So the split that occurred was between the faithful high priest of Zadok and the faithful remnant who are trying to walk in Torah, who have been deposed and cast out. The split between them and what took their place, which would have been first the Hellenistic priests in the temple sitting in Jerusalem, and then the Maccabean clans, the Maccabean dynasty, or it's synonymous with the Hasmonean dynasty, who then took over from the Hellenistic priests and ruled, just sat in those positions. So the split was between the legitimate priest and the faithful remnant, and against the illegitimate priests and mainstream society that followed Hellenism and the illegitimate priesthood, um, into their ways of error. Okay, so let me just I've got some bullet points here. The Zadoks are removed from office of high priest. They organize in the community. The community is run by sons of Zadok. So, it's being run by priests and of the Zadok clans or stock, which means that they are, potentially any of them could have become a high priest. It was populated by the faithful remnant. So the community would have been populated by the faithful remnant. But that's not the sum total of the faithful remnant, because always you have faithful remnant living throughout the land. But it would have been the coalescing place. It would be the focal point. It becomes the point of origin for the faithful remnant. And I'm going to say it's the place to which John the Baptist went when he became of age, and he went down into the wilderness of Judea. This is where he went to. He went down into this compound where we have the faithful remnant and the sons of Zadok, and a priestly organization and a community organization around Torah that was taking place. Okay, and they continue to remain faithful to the true Torah. And just to finish that theme of John the Baptist, I believe this is the community known as the Way, the area known as Damascus in some places. That's why we have the Damascus document. But this is the community. This is the grouping of people who were ready for the Messiah when he came, and then broadly embraced the Messiah, and standing in contrast to the mainstream communities that had followed Hellenism and then the Pharisees and Sadducees, who in general rejected the Messiah. Okay. I really should have put that in these bullet points, but I didn't. But okay, so the Zadoks were the ones removed from the high priest. Then we had the Hellenists or the Hasmoneans who were installed. They controlled the temple. They controlled mainstream Yehudim society, so the larger society, as a whole. The Pharisees and Sadducees rose to power, positions of prominence, office, and power during this time. This is when they came about. And the Pharisees became the most popular and dominant group in mainstream Yehudim society. And from them came the oral traditions. And really, through this whole time comes, as we turn back to, the Jews for guidance, we're turning to the wrong folks, because we turn to this time where by the time, as you're turning to this grouping of people and Judaism and their calendars and their traditions, their laws, their Talmud, now you're turning to error. To go back to true Israel and true Torah and true righteous ways of Yahuwah in Israel, you have to go back before the Zadok priests were deposed and go back into history to get the correct calendar, which would be the Enoch calendar, and true Torah, which goes back and precedes that. Okay, and then the teacher of righteousness, I think it's pretty clear in the writings, in the scrolls themselves. But if you go and reference the old writings of our canon of 66, we find the teacher of righteousness there. And if you go to the new writings, you see Yahushua being referenced as the teacher all the time. So it's clear it's clear within the scrolls themselves, in the times that they do reference the teacher of righteousness, that they are referencing Messiah as the true person who will lead the community and the faithful remnant back into the correct ways and understandings of Torah and the ways of Elohim, which is exactly what Messiah did. And that's what we learn and see in the Damascus document. The wicked priests, I'm going to suggest that the wicked priest is probably the sum total of the priests and not any particular one, because they all would qualify, because they're all standing in a position they ought not be standing in. And to the extent that they want to hold on to their position, they're going to find themselves in opposition to the Zadokites. For instance, who could argue that what Judas Maccabee did, and then his brother Jonathan, and then his brother Simon, when they opposed Greece, who had made all things Israel illegal upon pain of death, and they came in to fight for Torah and to fight for Israel against the Greeks? Well, who can argue that they were for Israel, they were pro-Israel, they were good? But when Jonathan was offered to be appointed to the high priesthood, this is when the error begins with the Maccabees, because while they were Levites, they were not Zadokites. Probably, I'm not the one to know, but probably the correct thing for Jonathan to do would have been to find a proper Zadokite, because Torah mandates it, that the high priest position be filled by a son of Aaron, which is the son of Zadok. So I don't think Jonathan would have been an evil priest per se, in terms of a guy who went about persecuting this group, although maybe he was, nor Simon been an evil guy, anti-Torah, going about persecuting the teacher of righteousness in this group. I don't think we would have found that in Jonathan and Simon, although the fact that they were sitting illegitimately in a high priest position that they should not have suggested that they were at least readily walking in error. Maybe they didn't know. I don't know. But maybe they were also evil. We don't have enough information, or at least I don't have enough information. Maybe they really were pursuing and opposing the teacher of righteousness and this community, and setting themselves up in opposition and persecuting this community. But certainly from Simon forward, as we get into Hyrcanus and other of the Hasmonean priests, well, they did evil things. Documentable evil. So by the time they had come on the scene, and in my opinion, these were probably, I think it's evil, and it'd be wicked to sit in the role of high priest. But I think with the coming of Hyrcanus and some of those who followed Simon, not only were they wickedly sitting in the position of high priest, but they acted wickedly. and persecuted. I think they would be obvious candidates for persecutors of the community and persecutors of the teacher of righteousness, all the way down to the last one. And I'll show you when I get to the timeline who that last one is. Um, all the way down to them before the kings of, the Herodian kings began in, I think it's 837 AD. I'll show you. So I'm going to say the wicked priests are all of the illegitimate priests, and certainly the wicked priests, starting with those that followed Simon at the time. Kittim, I will say that generally it includes Assyria. We have it right in the scrolls. In the Maccabean writings, first and second Maccabee, we have the Kittim of Greece identified. Then we have the Kittim of Babylon identified in different places. So we have multiple identities of Kittim, which is suggestive of Kittim meaning something a little other than what it's being presented to us. I do plan to do a word study on Kittim just to bring us back to, in a separate video, bring us back to who the Kittim were in all probabilities. And then again, sons of light and sons of darkness. Again, I'll do a video where I do a word study and just identify and confirm what seems obvious, but there's been teaching out there that of who the sons of light and sons of darkness are, and I think it's clear in Scripture who they are, and so I'll present that as well. So from here, I'm going to. This is what. If you go back and re-listen to this, you'll see who I'm saying this community is and why we should take them serious. It is not a scene, some esoteric group that we didn't know of heretofore. It is the faithful remnant of those trying to follow Yahuwah and the Torah and following the Zadokite priesthood and the remnant of the priests who were seeking and coalescing as the faithful remnant in a time when Hellenism and the Pharisees and the society at large was following errant teaching, errant doctrines. So this community is the faithful remnant to be headed up by the sons of Zadok, the priests, and faithful people who were trying to be faithful to Torah and faithful to Yahuwah. And they gathered together what are now the oldest scriptures we have. They go back farther than the Hebrew scriptures from which the Masorite text, Masorite Hebrew, the old writings were taken from, which would be the Masorite writings of Hebrew text. It's now older than that. It's even older than the Septuagint, which was created probably in the 3rd century BC under the Ptolemies, when they gathered together the Hebrew scriptures and had them rewritten into Greek, which formed the Septuagint. And I'm not going to go into the history of Septuagint, but they had all these scribes translate the Hebrew scriptures, and then they took those 70 writings of the scribes to form the Septuagint. But then, through the persecution of Rome and Church and Greece and all of the empires through which the devil has ruled throughout this time, they've all sought out scriptures and tried to destroy them, just like they've tried to seek out and destroy the faithful remnant. Always have. And so those Hebrew scriptures that form the basis of the Septuagint and even the Masorite text, all of those were destroyed. They've been hidden. And so until the discovery of these Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest scriptures we had came from the Hebrew text that the Masorites translated and gave us, which is from the Pharisees. Now that we've discovered the Dead Sea caves, we now have the oldest Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek writings that we have available to us, at least until we discover new things. These are the oldest scriptures available. So this community gathered together what would be scriptures in the day. They didn't have canonized scriptures. They didn't have a somebody who had decided that here's your 66 books or here's your 70 books. No, the Zadoks controlled, the priesthood controlled Torah, controlled the writings, and the Zadoks were, the high priesthood was responsible for keeping Torah available. So they would have gathered the scriptures of their day. And so this community gathered a library of scriptures, which included all of the books of our current 66 canonized scriptures, except for Esther. But it also included books that have been argued for years that we've been calling apocrypha, but we're only calling them apocrypha because somebody removed them from the scriptures that everybody was studying in the days of the community. And I think it's pretty evident that the guilty party who removed some of these scriptures would be the Pharisees and then the early church under the guise of Constantine and Catholicism, etc. Because the library of this community included what others and what we see in the new writings evidenced as thought of to be scripture, things like Jubilees and First Enoch and Ezra and Tobit and the 12 patriarchs, the testimonies of the 12 patriarchs, and other things in number. So we had a pretty good sized library of these things. But it also included a few things that, the Pharisees would have everybody believe that prophecy ended with Micah. Well, why? Why? Maybe they don't want us looking, because as hopefully I'm going to continue to do in this video, I'm going to show you why the church has missed, the church in the world has been left out of a period of history that is so critical to the formation of our faith. And so who would have done that? The Pharisees and the church, etc. So the scriptures that were part of this library, I think, hold value. I think they're preeminent over the leading of the Pharisees and the people in the councils of Nicaea and those who have said, okay, we're going to eliminate all these scriptures because we're just telling you it's not good for you. And here's what you can read. By doing that, they limit the information available to you. You have lots of gaps to fill that you can't do from the scriptures of 66. But why did they do that? They're hiding scriptures. It kind of reminds me of Daniel. Seal up scriptures, Daniel, until the time of the end. Well, now it appears that we're at the time of the end, where the scriptures are being found and being organized and being revealed, unsealed, for people to study and learn and fill the gaps. And I think that's what's happening. So my point would be that the community is the faithful remnant. The library that they saved is the faithful library of scripture. And the teacher of righteousness, the leader of this community, is not any particular person that rose to power. No, it is Messiah himself. The teacher of righteousness is the Messiah himself. So we are to take this community seriously, and we are to take the writings that they preserved and that are being translated and given to us very seriously. It should form the basis of our understanding of our faith. Okay, so that's an overview of my point here. From here in this video, I'm going to focus on the community identity, and I'm going to, I've tried to so far give you the what. Here's how you can perceive who this community is and what the Dead Sea Scrolls are. Here's how you can perceive them juxtaposed against what you've been told through the first 50, 60 years of their time by mainstream communities that might just be, I don't really want to go in there. I don't want to offer reasons to argue, but I'm just saying that I'm giving you the what. I've given you the what. From here, I want to start focusing on the why am I saying what I'm saying. So I'm going to go build a bit of a case. I'm going to start with the community identity in all three of these translations. So stick with me if you're interested, but this is the essence. I've completed the essence of what I wanted to do with this video, which is share with you whom the community is and what the library is and what these scriptures ought to mean to you and what it does to the validity of Jubilees and First Enoch and some of these extra writings that they have called apocrypha. Starting now, I'm going to start breaking down the writings and the forewords and the introductions of these three books to build the case. So stay with me if you will, if you can, and if you're interested. Thanks.